Okay, so we've done all that yummy gluing, yummy, messy, doesn't look like much now, but it's gonna be cool gluing. And now I wanna show you how to create some texture using plaster gauze. So if you guys aren't familiar, plaster gauze it's a very open open woven, I don't know what the right term would be, grammatically correct term. Anyway, it's impregnated with plaster of Paris and it's dry, but once you wet it, it activates the plaster of Paris, and so it becomes kind of smushy aroundy and you can shape it over things, and then when it starts to dry and cure, it hardens back up. So it gets harder than this. It gets like not quite that hard, but hard. So I like to I've been using this stuff for years, and I like to mostly have some pieces cut and ready to go, because once you get this wet, it immediately activates that hardening process. And so you don't want to have water flying everywhere on pieces that are going to be sitting there for a while. I mean, even 5 minutes. If a piece gets wet and it's sitting there for 5 minutes, it might already start hardening up on you. And once it's wet and hardening, you can't then reconstitute it. So I like to have some pieces ready to go. So I have this foam core. I might need a few more pieces because I want to wrap the edges, which I wasn't thinking of when I cut these. I like foam core because the reason I like this is because it doesn't take on a lot of the moisture from this after I wet it. There's a very thin paper layer, but then this is non-absorbent, plastic foam basically. And so what that means is A, it hardens and dries faster, and B, it stays flat. Like this thing won't cup. Cardboard and other things I'll cup a little bit, but because they're thin, they'll still dry fast enough. So you can do 1 or 2 layers at a time. I'm going to take all 3 of these layers and wet them. Give myself some working room here so I don't splash everywhere. You kind of wet them, and you don't really have to squeeze them. I just like to get most of the dripping done. And then I'm going to take one of these off, add it back in a minute. The more you work with it, the softer it gets. So as you start kind of like burnishing it, you kind of smooth it out. There's still always going to be a little bit of texture. I wanted to offset some of that a little bit. If it starts getting too soupy, just pat some of that texture or the water off with like a dry rag. So you can see you can still see that weave, but it's not as open as it is when it's dry. So that plaster that's in there, we're kind of smushing it around. And then I'm just gonna set that aside to dry. And it's kind of a little bit of a misnomer to say it's drying. It's a combination of drying and curing. So there's a chemical reaction happening, a chemical process happening, that once this plaster of Paris, which is essentially a gypsum base, once it starts the process of being turned back hard again, that's a chemical reaction that's happening. The water that's in it will, dang it, did I want to do that first? The water that's in it will be dry, technically dry, before the plaster is cured. Rough up that edge a little bit so it's not such a clean line. I'm just gonna let that line, these 2 lines show. I think that'll be kind of cool, but I just wanted to make sure there was a little bit wrapped around that edge. I'm going to make up a few of these because I feel like I could have fun with these. These pieces I cut a little bit bigger so they wrap. You can get really creative with the textures that you make. I've twisted this stuff before and made like almost what looks like rope. Kind of like I'll show you what I mean. I don't want to keep it on there for this particular one, but you can wet it and then literally mush it into a shape that you want. So it can be much more three-dimensional if you want. See how it gets really like soft and gooey? I don't want to throw this piece away, so I'm going to wrap it around a stick. Don't know what I'll do with this, but there it is for later when I have an idea. Just wanted to use that piece up instead of just toss it. So I don't know if you can see that wet spot right there. Slight color difference. If I had let that sit too long, that would have become a wet spot that I could not reconstitute, and it becomes this like hard spot. And eventually you could add some glue and, you know, kind of cover over it and stuff. It's not that big of a deal. It's just it doesn't allow you to mush the plaster around. If you were wanting to, you know, have a little bit more squishiness, it just is forever a little hard spot. There's actually some hard right there. You can sort of see how it's like stiff. Sometimes if it gets real stiff, it doesn't stick to the whatever you're putting it on. So that's the main reason, to try to keep the moisture away from. And generally speaking, this plaster gauze will stick to most surfaces, so you don't have to worry about, you just want to, you know, like kind of burnish it well. I've got a lot of water in here, so I'm going to put a dry piece on there and just let it soak up some of that water. You do want to make sure you're, you know, having it make good contact, but you don't need it to be like perfectly burnished. Nope, I don't think I'm going to use that piece. Nope, I'll just wrap this around the stick now. I don't want to cover up the other layers. I kind of like those seams showing. So again, when it starts getting real watery like that and you get liquid, and it can make it hard to work with. So you can just squeeze some of that liquid out, and then it allows you to smooth it out a little bit more. Then I'm just going to let those harden, and they're going to, when we start like putting gesso on the pieces that we've glued, we're also going to start doing paint and gesso on these pieces. So you can do, you could, just FYI, you could layer the gluing and the plaster. So like if I did this, once it got hard, you wouldn't want to do it now, but once it got hard, I could totally glue other stuff to it for even more texture. It's just, I'm erring on the side of simplicity and subtlety, because even though this isn't very interesting by itself, my plan of putting other things together, like I want some pieces that are more subtle and some pieces that are less subtle. So I don't necessarily want every single one to be interesting. I'm just curious if that's gonna make, if I press that into that, would it make, there is ever so slightly some texture in that. And I'm actually gonna do it again, because I wonder if by the time I add paint to it, will it show up even more? Doesn't look like much now, and it might not look like much then, but I want to see if while it's wet, you put it face down on plastic and let it harden. I like to get it really mushy, and I let it stay kind of wet. And then I'm going to dry that face down on there. What's going to happen is it's going to be a little bit different texture than the ones that I just rubbed and air dried. This is already getting hard. It's going to be fun to play with. I love this stuff. I love it. So we're going to let these harden up. The other glued pieces are drying. So once we get everything dried, we're going to start adding gesso and paint and start unifying them.